The courtroom smelled like old wood and tension. I sat in the last row, dressed in quiet colors, anonymous by design. No one turned when I entered, and that's exactly how I wanted it. My sister, once the little girl who followed me everywhere, was shackled at the wrists, staring at the floor as the charges were read aloud. Possession, distribution, fraud. I barely recognized her, and I don't think she would have recognized me either, not in this room, not like this. I kept my head down as the prosecutor spoke, but my pulse was thundering. I wasn't here as the governor today, I was just Mackenzie, a sister trying to make sense of the wreckage we both came from. Then the judge paused. His fingers hovered over the case file. He looked up slowly, scanning the room. His eyes stopped on me. Confused at first, then recognition. He leaned forward, squinting like he couldn't believe it. "Wait," he said, his voice slicing the silence. "You're the governor?" Every head turned. Reporters dropped their pens. My parents stiffened in the front row. And just like that, my two worlds, public and private, collided under the fluorescent lights of courtroom 6B. I was 10 when Hazel was born, and I remember thinking she was the best thing that ever happened to me. Our parents didn't agree. They treated her birth like an accident they couldn't return, barely looking up from their drinks long enough to remember her feeding times. So I stepped in because someone had to. Bottles, diapers, lullabies, learned it all before I hit middle school. I wasn't her sister anymore. I was her entire world, and she became mine. Our house looked normal from the outside. A small white ranch with blue shutters and a swing set that hadn't swung in years. Inside, it was just silence and resentment. Mom disappeared into her wine glass every night. Dad, drowned in TV static and cigarette smoke. They were physically present but emotionally vacant. The lights were on, but no one was home except me and Hazel. I brushed her hair before school, read to her under a blanket when the heat got cut off, and used birthday money to buy her shoes when hers had holes. She clung to me like gravity, and I clung to her like hope. I didn't just raise high, built my entire identity around keeping her safe. When I got the acceptance letter, I didn't feel joy, I felt guilt. A full scholarship to the University of Michigan, political science, public policy, a path out, a future. But how do you leave the person you've spent your whole life protecting? I didn't have an answer, just a clock ticking down to move-in day, so I did what I always did, planned. I sat my parents down with a typed agreement like I was negotiating a peace treaty. I laid out expectations for Hazel's care meals, bedtime, school pickups. I even offered to send money from my campus job. They nodded like they were listening, but their eyes said, finally, freedom. Hazel cried when I left. She was 7. I gave her a flip phone with my number saved under big sis and pink, post-its hidden in her suitcase with little notes. "I'm proud of you, you're brave, I love you." I called every Sunday, sometimes twice. But over time, her voice changed. Shorter calls, distracted answers. I didn't realize what was happening until it was too late. My parents rewrote history in my absence, told her I'd left because I was tired of being her babysitter, that I wanted a real life, one without her in it. She believed them. How could she not? She was a child, and they were the only voices in the room. When I came home, that first break, Hazel didn't run into my arms. She barely looked at me. And in that silence, I felt myself being erased. By the time I was elected to state office, I had crafted a spotless public image, clean record, clear goals, unwavering dedication to policy reform. But behind that polished veneer was a storm I couldn't control. Hazel had dropped out of school. Rumors circled, drugs, arrests, the wrong crowd. And through it all, my parents kept telling the same story. Mackenzie left. She chose ambition over family. We were left to pick up the pieces. Their versions spread like wildfire through neighbors, teachers, even reporters who'd heard whispers from family friends. No one cared about the money I sent, the apartment I'd prepared for Hazel, the letters that went unanswered. All they saw was a rising politician who'd turned her back on home. I could fight bills, I could fight policy, but I couldn't fight silence, not Hazel's, and not the one my parents weaponized so strategically. They didn't need to scream to destroy me, they just had to say nothing and let the world assume the worst. Each time Hazel slipped further away, I blamed myself. I'd chosen to chase change. But what good was power if I couldn't protect the one person who needed me most? The judge stared at me, his voice cutting through the silence. "Wait, you're the governor." Every pair of eyes in the courtroom turned. The press stirred. My parents froze. Hazel really looked at me for the first time in years. I stood slowly, pulling off the cap and glasses I'd worn like armor. No more hiding. Double quotes. Yes, Your Honor, I said, my voice clear. I'm Mackenzie Davis, Hazel's sister. A murmur swept through the room like wind through dry leaves. The judge banged his gavel. Order. He asked if I was here in any official capacity. I shook my head. No, sir, I'm here because she's my sister, that's all. At his request, I approached the bench. Then unexpectedly he offered me the stand, a statement. One chance to speak. I hadn't planned to, but my silence had cost us too much already. I swore in, then turned to the courtroom. I didn't abandon my sister, I said. I raised her, fed her, bathed her, taught her how to ride a bike. I worked double shifts as a teenager to keep her warm in the winter. When I went to college, I sent money, called weekly, and prepared a home for her. I handed over documents, bank records, call logs, photos of her room in my apartment. My parents told a lie so often, it became truth. But it wasn't. Hazel didn't lose a sister. She lost the story of who we really were. Hazel's eyes shimmered. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It felt like something breaking open. We met in a small conference room behind the courtroom, surrounded by officers, but for the first time in years. It felt like just the two of us. Hazel sat across from me, older, worn, but still somehow the girl who used to fall asleep on my shoulder during thunderstorms. Why are you here? She asked, her voice brittle. Because you're my sister, I said quietly. That's never changed. She looked down at her hands, then up at me with something between disbelief and grief. They said you left because you didn't want me, that you wanted your own life. I swallowed hard. They needed someone to blame, and I wasn't there to defend myself. Tears slid down her cheeks. I was so angry at you. For so long, I didn't know what was real anymore. We both lived in someone else's version of the truth, I said, but we can write the next part ourselves. If you want to. She nodded slowly. That was the start. The apology didn't fix everything, but it opened a door. Over the months that followed, through therapy, check-ins, and hard conversations, we began to stitch together what had been torn apart, one scar at a time. 6 months later, we stood on opposite ends of a small room in the governor's mansion. I was behind the podium, announcing the launch of the Bridge program, an initiative that would provide support for young caregivers, children raising siblings, teens holding their families together with duct tape and hope. Hazel stood quietly in the back, her hair pulled into a loose braid, a program folder in her hands. Most people didn't recognize her. They saw a young woman in recovery, maybe a guest from one of the centers. But I knew, and she knew I saw her. I spoke about the invisible burdens kids carry when parents fail them. I spoke about how support isn't just a safety net, it's a lifeline. I didn't say her name. I didn't need to. As I finished, our eyes met across the room. No tears this time. Just a small nod, steady, knowing. The kind only two people who've been through hell together can share. The applause swelled around us. But for a moment, all I heard was the silence between us finally breaking. We weren't the sisters we used to be, but we were something new, and that, maybe, was even stronger.